Hey, everybody. First of all, happy Super Bowl Sunday. So each week I go live here on TikTok and YouTube to do an AP Lang Q&A. My goal is to help students prepare for the AP Lang exam because it's approximately 3 months away at this point. So there's still plenty of time to prepare. And so I hope to answer student questions about the exam, teacher questions too, if you're a teacher and you have questions, and basically help students get ready. So if you're just joining, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Let me know if you have any AP Lang related questions because I would be happy to answer them. So, yes, please leave any AP questions that you have in the chat, and I'd be happy to answer those questions. One question that students sometimes have, especially at this point in the year, is basically like, how can I improve my essay scores? Because a lot of times students are kind of hovering at a certain score on the rubric and they want to know how to improve that score. So I think one of the biggest things that we need to acknowledge about all of the AP Lang FRQs is that commentary is going to be incredibly important. And I think it's also the hardest part too, besides sophistication. So if you are an AP Lang student and you're just joining, feel free to leave questions and comments in the chat. I'd be happy to address those. But right now we're going to talk about some quick commentary tips while we're waiting for more questions. So for commentary, I think it's important to understand what it actually is first. So in an essay, you're going to need evidence and you're going to need commentary. So the commentary is supposed to explain the significance of the evidence. So, one quick tip for you if you're trying to improve your AP Lang essays is to use the word because. And you might be thinking, okay, that's really simple. How do I use that word and how does it help me? Well, here's the thing. Commentary is the why, it's the analysis. So, a lot of times students will make a claim and then they'll support it with evidence and they have like one simple sentence of commentary, right? And they don't push it further. And we're looking for more commentary than evidence. So, by saying the word because, you are expanding your commentary. I sometimes joke with my students that it's kind of like channeling your inner toddler and like keep asking yourself like why and how and so what. Because if you can keep answering those questions, it's going to improve your commentary. So that's one quick tip. Another quick tip for commentary is to use certain verbs to help you basically convey the significance of what you're talking about. And these are all kind of synonyms for the word shows. Now, technically speaking, there's nothing wrong with saying shows, but it is a little bit lower level and it is a little bit imprecise. And so we can use other words instead. So these verbs could be things like emphasizes, illustrates, highlights, even suggests or implies could work. Underscores is a good verb to use. So underscores means emphasizes. So we want to make sure that we're using precise verbs, but those verbs that I just said can help your commentary as well. And honestly, you can use those verbs that like illustrates, highlights, emphasizes. You can use those for all three essays, and it's a way to build up your commentary. So if you're just joining, feel free to ask some questions in the chat. I see we have one about the sophistication point, so let's go ahead and tackle that one as best we can. So here's the thing. The sophistication point, as you probably already know, is very difficult to earn, but there are some ways that you can at least try to earn it. And then if you don't actually earn it, it'll at least help your commentary. So the first thing is you want to consider your writing style. So in the rubrics, it talks about a vivid and descriptive style. So one quick tip for you for that is to focus on, number one, eliminating lower level words from your writing. These could be words like good, bad, really, very, thing. I'm trying to think of others. Huge is, I don't know why that comes up in essays all the time, but I keep seeing huge as some kind of descriptor in essays, and you can be much more precise than that. So if you're going for sophistication or if you're just trying to improve your writing, step one is eliminate these lower level words. Hey, Marker Learning's in the house. Awesome. Y'all, they have such great materials. If you are looking to study for like AP Lang and all the APs, definitely check them out. So for the sophistication point, if we're talking about style, we want to eliminate lower level words. Then we want to start focusing on like increasing to a higher level vocabulary. And like this could be done by adding in adjectives and adverbs. So we want to, instead of just saying like, the writer states, or for whatever reason. We would want to say like the writer boldly asserts or logically asserts. Now, just doing these simple fixes is not going to earn you the sophistication point on that alone, but it will help your style. So anytime you can use adjectives and adverbs to be more precise, it helps. I would also encourage you to learn how to use advanced punctuation, especially if you are also taking the SAT or the ACT, because there are grammar questions on this. And it's not on the AP Lang test. It's not part of the writing multiple choice. But if you know how to use these different types of punctuation, like semicolons, colons, dashes, and even commas to like offset a non-essential clause or like in a positive phrase, if you can do that well, it makes your writing read much more smoothly, because a lot of the essays that sort of lack that style tend to be just like simple sentences, like subject, verb, and then some more info. Maybe there's a little bit of sentence variety, but it's like not super advanced. So one way to help with this is this advanced punctuation. And so the way I start teaching it is my students take the ACT as their state test. And so we go through like all the grammar rules of the different types of punctuation. And so once they can recognize it in multiple choice and write it in sentences of their own, then what we have them do is they start incorporating it into their writing when appropriate. I feel like once students are able to apply that understanding and kind of organically write that way, it helps, because when you use a colon effectively, or when you use a set of dashes effectively, it really does make the paragraph read more smoothly. And it shows a greater control or command of language. Now, that's not to say that you need a colon or dash or something in every single paragraph. You could definitely overdo it. So we don't want to do that. But that is a way to help your style as well, is number one, eliminating lower level vocabulary. Number two, adding in adjectives and adverbs that make your writing more precise. And then number three, focusing on that advanced punctuation. So that's kind of like how I help my students with style. I do have some students who are more interested in creative writing. And so for certain prompts, they can kind of like use like vivid descriptions in either their intro or like maybe their body paragraphs, depending on what it is. But my students who I'm thinking of have told me a couple times, like, yeah, it worked for last prompt, but it definitely was harder for this one. So I think that one kind of depends on the topic. But you also don't want to turn it into a piece of creative writing. Like, you don't want to just like change the prompt or something, but you can use kind of like a creative opening. Just make sure that you have the time to do so, because your evidence and commentary are so much more important. Is there a minimum number of paragraphs we need for each essay? Technically, no. There's not a defined minimum. So the minimum that I tell my students is a short intro, okay, because you need your thesis. Like, worst case scenario, if you are not pacing correctly or you're just getting writer's block, write a defensible thesis, regardless of which essay we're talking about. If you can write one or two sentences before that and then build to your thesis, that usually is a little bit better, because sometimes just reading a thesis is kind of like jarring, but it's okay, because really the only point you get in your intro, in my opinion, is the thesis. Sophistication has to be earned throughout the whole essay, so you can have a short intro and have amazing body paragraphs and potentially still earn the point. So you need an intro with a thesis. It can be just a thesis, worst case scenario. Then I would say, like, absolute worst case scenario, you need one body paragraph, because you can at least have an evidence and commentary score of like a 2 with one body paragraph. If it's like super amazing, I've heard, like, I haven't seen the essay, but I heard a student wrote like an intro and one really long body paragraph and still made like a 130, but I haven't seen that essay. But like, if you are, for whatever reason, pressed for time, you can do a 120 score with just one really good body paragraph. Make sure you have your commentary. Now, those are like worst case scenarios. That's not what I'm actually suggesting you do. But I feel like sometimes when we focus on how many paragraphs to write, we don't focus on like the worst case scenario. So that's the worst case scenario, is intro, one body paragraph. Ideally, though, you will have time to do an intro and 2 body paragraphs. Some students do 3. Honestly, most of my students for the past 2 years, like pretty much since they redesigned the AP rubric, most of my students do 2 body paragraphs. And the reason why is because I really encourage them to develop their ideas. I would rather have them write 2 really strong paragraphs than 3 mediocre ones. And sometimes they have told me like pushing for 3 body paragraphs is really stressful, or they don't have 3 distinct ideas, or whatever the case is. So they've scored very well on the actual exam. So 2 body paragraphs is fine. Then the question becomes, do you need a conclusion? And the answer is like, no, it's not mandatory. So I've had a lot of students, for whatever reason, either not have enough time to write a conclusion, or like on exam day, if they're doing like a mock exam or the real exam, maybe they just wanted to move on to the next essay, just like in case, like they wanted to make sure they had enough time. So in that case, they just kind of ended the body paragraph they were working on in a way that like made the essay sound like it was going to end. And that usually works better than like sometimes what students will do is they'll put like one like quick 1 sentence conclusion. And sometimes that feels really like, for lack of a better word, like cringy, because it's like you just told me those things in the paragraph and now you have like a 1 sentence thing. So if you know you have a defensible thesis, like you don't always need a conclusion. If you're not sure it's defensible, then definitely write a conclusion with a new thesis or like a refined thesis. Now, if you're going for the sophistication point and you're trying to situate the issue in a broader context, then I would suggest that you have a conclusion. You can still have your 2 body paragraphs, but a lot of the more sophisticated essays do have a conclusion. Now, if you write a conclusion, are you automatically going to get the sophistication point? No. But I have seen students kind of use the conclusion as a way to expand past what they're talking about. So, for rhetorical analysis, that could be answering the question of, why is this message important to the world today? Or how is this historical event or this text still important? So depending on which essay we're talking about, sometimes that broader context fits best in the conclusion. That's not to say that it can't go in body paragraphs though. So anyway, that is kind of like your general, how many paragraphs do you need, best and worst case scenario. But like intro and 2 bodies is fine if you're running out of time. Is it mandatory to use 2+ sentences of commentary to earn the point? For sophistication, no. There's no like, with sophistication, there's not like a, like you must have this many sentences. I personally think students should try for at least 2 sentences of commentary. I've heard some teachers say 4, and like I know there's like sentence frames for it and stuff. And like my stronger writers could probably do 4, but I think if I, as a teacher, were to demand 4 of all my students, I feel like that would add unnecessary pressure. So I just tell them we want more commentary than evidence, and we just kind of look at it from that light. Let's see. Let me scroll up on TikTok because I'm sure I missed a couple questions. But yeah, keep the questions coming. And if you find the knowledge helpful on TikTok, please tap your screen. If you like it on YouTube, give that thumbs up button a tap. Is there a minimum of body paragraphs? Okay, we just addressed that. How much context for the intro? Okay, so that's a good question. So it kind of looks a little bit different depending on which essay we're talking about, but usually it's like 1 or 2 sentences. Like usually it's not very much context. So let's think of it this way. If your essay just starts with a thesis, let's say rhetorical analysis, and you just write, FDR does this and this in order to urge Congress to declare war. I happen to be teaching a student about that speech yesterday. So we'll just go with that. That is like super jarring as a start. But if you say 1 or 2 sentences about World War II or the attack on Pearl Harbor, and then you say that FDR made choice 1 and choice 2 and is addressed to Congress asking them to declare war, then it makes a whole lot more sense. So that's why usually the context can be really quick. There are ways to put the context in your thesis. I have sentence frames for this. So if you want like just a quick way to write a defensible thesis, definitely check out some of my TikToks, but also my YouTube channel. It's probably the best way to get it because I have, if you type in like Coach Hall writes thesis statement and then you type in which essay you want, I have blog posts, I have YouTube videos, and they have sentence frames in there. And you can just like screenshot those and the examples and use them in your writing very quickly. But yeah, that thesis point is very lenient on the exam. Now for synthesis and argument, if we're talking about context for that, okay, for synthesis, I see a lot more students trying to show like both sides of the issue. And I think that can be okay as long as your thesis is clear about like what position you're taking. Um, Sometimes people try to define terms in their intro, and I think that can be helpful depending on the prompt. Like last year on the exam, it was STEM education, and so many people like defined what STEM was. And I get it. I probably would have as a high school student too. But like sometimes we can just assume that that's like a known thing. But for instance, in last year's prompt for Q3, it was about timely decisions. And I think if it were me writing the essay, I would probably want to define what a timely decision is from the onset. So that way I've set that like parameter, if you will, for the essay itself. So sometimes defining your topic or like setting those parameters can be helpful, and it can be like context, if you will. A lot of times we see context for synthesis of like whatever the issue is has become a debatable topic over the past few years. And like, I get it, you're under pressure. There's not much more to say. And at least that introduces the idea. So the goal of context for your intro is basically to kind of lead into your thesis so that it's not just like, boom, here's the start of my essay. But your thesis for argument and synthesis can also be very simple. So it could just be like basically taking the wording of the prompt, like, this topic is overrated because my students are doing that in class. They're doing the overrated prompt. Still defensible. Just remember for rhetorical analysis, you need those rhetorical choices and ideally the message, argument, and purpose as well. Let's see. More questions. Let's see. How do we improve on multiple choice? Okay, so it kind of depends on which part we're talking about, reading or the writing. I feel like the writing is, as a teacher, the writing's easier to teach because it's a lot of like logical thinking. So let's start there. One thing you're going to want to practice on is transition words. And there are SAT and ACT questions that you can look at too. So for transition questions where it's like, how do we, like, which word do we put in this blank? You want to figure out what is the relationship between those sentences. So are they adding on new info? Because if so, you're looking for words like additionally or also. Are they showing contrast? Because then you're looking for words like conversely or however. If it's like cause and effect, you might be looking for subsequently, which kind of means like next, or maybe like furthermore or moreover, things like that. Thus, I think would work too. So I would say if we're talking about multiple choice and like the writing and also stuff that overlaps with the SAT and ACT, because a lot of you might have that coming up as well. Knowing your transition words and how they function helps. I think the two that I've seen on the AP Lang test that have kind of like sort of thrown students off are subsequently and moreover. So make sure you know what those words mean. I think of moreover as more like furthermore. And I think subsequently is more just like after or next. So that would be one thing to practice. Sometimes they ask you questions about like, should the writer add this sentence? And then they give you the sentence, or they might say like, should the writer delete a sentence? And then they have it underlined. I tell my students to look at the paragraph and kind of decide yes or no and why. Don't even look at the answer choices. And we practice this in class because if they're able to tell me like, should we add the sentence? And they say yes, I'm like, okay, why? And they tell me, and then it's almost always one of the answer choices, like very closely, if not word for word, what it is. So when we want to add a sentence, it's usually because it's adding extra info. It could be providing a relevant detail. It could be providing a definition that we need. So we add things that are valuable, but it has to be on topic. We don't want to add like tangential info. So if we delete something, it has to be because it's either redundant, like maybe it was already said in the paragraph, or because it's like not on topic. So the add delete questions can be, I think, best answered if you don't look at the multiple choice answers right away. Just look at like yes or no and kind of answer in your own head. Now on AP, there are 5 answer choices. So I had a student ask me once, like, if there's 3 yes and 2 no, is it more likely to be yes? Because sometimes it's like 2 yeses and 3 nos. And I was looking to see if there was any correlation on like AP Classroom, and there really wasn't. So they just have 5 answer choices. So don't let the fact that there's 3 of one and 2 of the other kind of like, don't read into that too much, basically. So that can be multiple choice. Trying to think of what other tips I have for that one. Writing is just usually for my students, that's the easier section. I even have a couple students each year who have started with the writing because you have two reading passages. So that's approximately half of your multiple choice. The last three passages are writing. So I have some students who are very, very accurate with those and they like to just start there because they feel like that's going to help them get the higher score. Because remember, for multiple choice on the AP Lang exam, it's 1 point each. There are 45 questions. It's worth 45% of your composite. So if a question is super hard, you don't get any bonus points if you get it right. So that also is another tip just in general is like, don't linger on questions. You should definitely answer it as best you can, even if it's a guess. And that goes for the SAT and the ACT as well. Because there's no penalty for guessing. So at least if you attempt it, you have a chance of getting it right. And if you can narrow it down to two answers, by process of elimination, then that will increase your odds. So now for reading, some students do better reading the questions first and then going to the passage because they know what they're looking for. I personally function better this way. I did not know that in high school. I always read the passage first, then went to the questions. And then once I was in grad school, I was like, wait a minute. Like, if I look at the questions and I know what I'm supposed to be looking for, this could streamline the process. So I think everybody's brain works differently. I have had some students be like, oh my gosh, this is super helpful. Let me do it this way. And I've had other students be like, I can't. Like, just no. So just do what works for you in that regard. There's going to be a lot of questions for multiple choice that are like very explicitly in the passage. So you just need to go and find that textual evidence. There are usually some questions that deal with a specific word. So read the surrounding sentences. Like if it says the word in line 55, don't just go to line 55 and don't just read the sentence that it contains. Like read the whole paragraph or at least like a sentence before it and a sentence with it and a sentence after, because almost always there's a context clue somewhere. And if you are only looking at that line, you're going to miss it. And usually the words they choose for these things have like different meanings anyway. So just read the surrounding sentences for those. There's going to be questions about like the purpose or function of paragraphs. Those can usually be answered just by looking at the paragraph. So if you're running out of time, I tell my students to prioritize the questions that deal with like a very explicit part of the text, whether it's like the first paragraph or second paragraph or final paragraph, because you can usually answer those sort of like in isolation, if that makes sense. I was thinking of a tip as I was talking and now I can't remember it, but it had something to do with the reading section. Okay, if I think of it, I'll come back to it. But I do have some videos on YouTube with tips as well. Oh, I remember now. Okay, this is not fact. This is theory. So take it for what it's worth. But I have heard from other teachers that when a passage is really hard, the questions are easy. And when the passage is easy, the questions are hard. And so I kind of looked into some passages and then I like asked my students about it. We looked at the ones where they kind of struggled and I told them this theory and they were like, yeah, that fits. Like it tracks. So just a theory. But if you have a really hard passage, don't freak out. Don't abandon ship. Don't think you're going to fail because I have seen cases where the passage was really hard and the questions were easy. Now, the flip side of that is I've seen times where the passage was easy and the questions are hard and it's like, ugh. So basically what I'm trying to tell you is like, don't psych yourself out as you're taking the test because if one passage is hard, it does not mean the whole test is hard. Also, just because the passage is hard, it doesn't mean you're failing. Same for the essays. Like just because an essay prompt is really hard, it doesn't mean that you're not going to score well. And if it's hard for you, it's probably hard for everybody else in that room, whether they want to admit it or not. And you obviously can't ask them. So like take the difficulty for what it is. It's an AP test, but like it all kind of evens out eventually. So let's see. That was multiple choice tips. Is it true I can make up evidence? Yes, it is. Some teachers don't like it, but yes, it is. I will tell you. So I just find this funny because one of my coworkers, she teaches AP US history. Her daughter took my class last year, made a 5 on the exam. I have known this girl since she was probably like early elementary school. So when students could talk to us about the exam, She was like, yeah, I wrote about Hamilton, which makes sense because her mom's a history teacher. She loves the musical and she knew a lot about Hamilton. And she's like, yeah, and I also wrote about my sister. And I just burst out laughing because she does not have a sister. She has a brother. And she was like, look, you said that if we had nothing else, we can make up something as long as it was not overly dramatic and believable. And she's like, it was believable. And so, like, the person reading her essay is not going to know that she doesn't have a sister. And even as a teacher, even if I know it's not true, I have to like put myself out of it for a moment. So, am I advocating for you to make up evidence? No. But as long as it's not like super melodramatic, I don't think people are really going to know. So, you kind of have to make um a decision in the moment. Like it's your integrity, if you will. But like, I don't know. As someone who likes creative writing and stuff, I'm kind of like, like that doesn't say it has to be a factual example. So I kind of feel like I prefer my students to use historical evidence and current events when possible. And then I have zero issue with kids writing about personal experience or like pop culture. Just do it well. If any of my current students are watching, y'all know that this week we had a conversation about I have a student who wanted to write about the movie Anaconda. And I was like, that's probably not going to be your best evidence. And then she wanted to write about Interstellar or something. Also, probably not going to be your best evidence. That being said, so she was like, all right, challenge accepted. And so she wrote about Interstellar and then what was it? The space race. And honestly, like she got either a 5 or a 6 on the essay because she did it well. So if you're going to write about personal experience, pop culture, whatever it is, just make sure you do it well. You got to choose the best evidence in the moment. And quite frankly, like I've done mock essays with my students, and it is hard to write a Q3 essay. Like I wish more teachers wrote alongside their students because I feel like when I do that, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is actually really hard. So it's my least favorite of the essays. Okay, tips for a strong thesis. For rhetorical analysis, be sure to have rhetorical choices. I tell students to put message, argument, or purpose in there as well. I feel like that makes it stronger. For rhetorical analysis, use rhetorically accurate verbs if you can, as opposed to nouns. That's going to strengthen your thesis. For synthesis and argument, I think the biggest tip is like, don't give away your evidence too soon, if that makes sense. So I'm trying to think of an example, but like, okay, let's do the disobedience prompt. You want to have like kind of broader ideas, if that makes sense. So like the prompt was something about like the value of disobedience. So if you said like disobedience is valuable when it leads to social progress, that's a defensible position. But I would rather see that than something like disobedience is valuable for people like Martin Luther King, because then it's like, okay, then I know your paragraphs about that. So if you say like disobedience is valuable when it leads to like change or reform, and then you use like Martin Luther King or somebody else as your evidence, that's better. So don't put your exact evidence in your thesis, if that makes sense. Like use the reasoning or like the bigger idea, but don't spoil your evidence that's coming up later by putting that in there. You can put like topics, like I've seen students do like, I think it's for exploring the unknown. It was something like exploring the unknown is valuable in science, music, and something else. That's fine because I at least know you're going to talk about science, but I don't know which scientist you're going to talk about. So you haven't really spoiled too much. It's still defensible. Can the passages be Old English? I don't think so anymore. Maybe for AP Lit, but for AP Lang, okay, they used to have 4 passages for reading, and they used to all have a certain time period. Now it seems like one is going to be relatively contemporary, and then one might be a little bit older, but it's probably going to be like 1800s. When I hear Old English, I think of like 1600s. I don't think they go that far back. So I would say I would say 1700s is probably the latest, or no, the earliest, sorry. Especially like kind of like American Revolution era, like 1770s is probably the oldest they would go, in my opinion. I could be totally wrong. I would not go any earlier than that. But then again, I like contemporary stuff. So I would say if you have studied things from like the late 1700s or 1800s and you get comfortable with that language, you'll probably be fine. Random tip, but in the 1800s, the word want, W-A-N-T, did not necessarily mean like want, like I want water. It meant like lack of. And I've seen like 2 either prompts or passages where it had want used as like for want of something was like for lack of something. But I think they're starting to do a really good job of putting stuff like that in the footnotes. So if you have a reading passage or a rhetorical analysis passage that has endnotes or footnotes, please read them because they put those there for a reason. Can the intro be hook to context sentences and thesis? Yes, you add it. You said yes, hook is good, not necessary. I used to teach it that way. I used to tell my students like write a hook. My students were like, it's hard. And I'm like, it's okay. And then now I'm like, no, like just leave the hook out. So if you are a former student of mine watching this from like 5 years ago, sorry I made y'all try to write those hooks all the time. In a like essay that's not timed, yes, I feel like you kind of need some kind of hook as long as it's not cheesy. But for a timed essay, no, like don't waste your time. Context sentences, yes. If possible. Thesis, yes. Transition sentence should not be after the thesis. That should be like the topic sentence of your next paragraph. So the way I teach rating is we don't transition, we don't like foreshadow new ideas. We use like for a body paragraph, I teach it as topic sentence, which is like your main idea or your claim, evidence, commentary, concluding sentence. The concluding sentence should not preview your next idea. It should wrap up your paragraph, like tie back to your thesis, like make sure it's clear what your main idea was. And I say that because I've read so many essays where I get to the end of the paragraph and I'm like, what was the student trying to prove again? And sometimes just that little sentence that reminds me is very helpful. Also, you can use topic sentences of like body paragraph 2 and body paragraph 3 if you're writing a third body paragraph to connect your ideas and transition well that way. That's going to read for a better essay or make for a better essay because you have a stronger line of reasoning. And I do have topic sentences for that. I think I have a few videos that deal with it. And I have a couple TikToks that deal with it. So actually, speaking of TikTok, I'm really close to 10K. When I get to 10K on TikTok, I can make playlists. And so that would help me out so much. If you're watching this and you're not following and you're like, I'm taking AP Lang, I can give her a follow. I would really appreciate that. Or if you have friends who are in AP Lang and you're like, hey, like this person helps us, and they're willing to follow, that would help because then I could like actually make a playlist for things like thesis statements and topic sentences and transitions. And then you could just go to those playlists instead of me being like, hey, Google this on YouTube or something. So if that helps, like please follow on TikTok because then I can start making those playlists as soon as I get to 10K. And then it'll be a lot easier for you to like cram for the AP Lang exam if you want to. But yeah, so that's kind of like the general. Someone said, sorry, I've made y'all waste your time. Okay. I don't think you did. I probably missed that. Let's see. How do I synthesize 2 texts? So, well, for the synthesis essay, you're going to want to try to put, I think, at least 2 sources in a paragraph. And the reason I say that is because synthesis is a conversation of sources. So when I've read essays from a student where it's like, body paragraph 1 mentions this source, body paragraph 2, this source, body paragraph 3, this source, then it felt really disconnected. So for synthesis, try to put 2 sources per paragraph. You need 3 total sources. So most of my students use 4 just as like a safety net. Now, they're not going to do a double passage like they used to. Sometimes they would give like, on rhetorical analysis, they'd give 2 passages kind of side by side. I think they've totally stopped doing that. They haven't done that in over a decade. And part of the reason why is because that's really hard to do in 40 minutes. Now, on the SAT multiple choice, and sometimes the ACT, I think the ACT does it too. They have like a double passage where you have to analyze for multiple choice, but it's like, here's questions about passage 1 and here's questions about passage 2. Here's questions about both of them. I haven't seen that on AP either. And honestly, I'm kind of grateful. So, yeah, that would be just like a quick thing for synthesis. Can the essays be standard 5-paragraph essays? Yes. Yes, they can. In fact, you can do a 4-paragraph essay. I've even had students write 3 paragraphs and still score really well. So intro, 2 bodies, and they ran out of time. Do you tutor? I do. Thank you for asking. Okay, 1 second. Sorry, I've got a sore throat. I've been talking for a while. Okay, shameless plug here and take it for what it's worth. Yes, I do tutor. I typically tutor on a platform called OutSchool. I do one-on-one tutoring. Most of my time slots are kind of full, but I'm happy to work students in. I do sessions for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever you need. I try to keep the prices reasonable. And when you sign up for OutSchool, they give you like a $20 credit anyway. That being said, I'm also offering some group classes coming up. One is like an AP Lang boot camp, and the other one is like a session where we help you. It's a group session, but we help you plan for the exam as far as like what you need to do to be successful for the test, kind of like playing to your individual strengths and weaknesses. So those are coming up in like April. They are already on OutSchool. So if you want information about tutoring, if you go to my profile, there is a link tree, and then it should say like students, and it should have those links if you want access to it. Also, you can contact me on IG, and because like TikTok doesn't always allow that. And I can like send you specific links and chat with you there if you're interested. But I would love to have people start signing up for those group classes so that way I can like start planning everything. But I've got different options. I'm also doing free sessions. Besides these are every Sunday. So 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, I go live on TikTok and YouTube. But also I do YouTube lives with Tim Freitas from the Garden of English. We do, I think last year we did 4. So we did like 1 for each essay, and then the night before the test or something like that. We're doing something very similar this year. So I think right now they're going to be on his channel. I'm going to see if maybe 2 can be on his and 2 can be on my channel. And so once I have that info, it'll be posted as well. So those are some just general tutoring options. Okay, I've been kind of unintentionally ignoring YouTube. So let me answer a couple questions there. Tips on moving from a 3 to a 4 in evidence and commentary, specifically synthesis and rhetorical analysis. Okay, so for rhetorical analysis, what you need to do is usually an essay that scores a 3 for rhetorical analysis, it's because one body paragraph was strong, and then the other 1 or 2, however many you had, didn't quite get there. And so you need to make sure that all of your claims not only have evidence and commentary and are very thorough, but you want to make sure that you're analyzing the word choice within the quotes and paying attention to those details. And you need it to be consistent. A 4 on for row B, evidence and commentary, regardless of which essay we're talking about, is consistent. And that's, I think, the hard part. The good news is for a 3, you just need one really strong paragraph and it can go there. So I would say if you're at the 3, look at some of your old essays where you got a 3 for evidence and commentary and try to figure out, okay, which one was my strong paragraph? And then where did I kind of slip a little bit? Where could I have added more commentary? For rhetorical analysis, make sure you're connecting explicitly to the message, argument, or purpose, whichever one that the prompt is asking for. Because I feel like that gets left out a lot. Students will like talk about the choice and they'll kind of like analyze it a little bit, but they'll never actually explain how that choice helps connect to the message, argument, or purpose. So if you're interested in a video, if you want to hear me talk about it even more and see some examples, Google Coach Hall writes my best tip for rhetorical analysis. I think I published it like last year, but it goes in depth with like how to get a solid body paragraph. And if you can duplicate that, hopefully that'll lead to a 4, but it'll help you improve your commentary. But that video, I think, would be very helpful. Now for synthesis, I think it's the same kind of concept. Usually students might have like one strong paragraph, but then the other paragraphs have evidence and commentary. They're just not like strong enough, like it's just not pushing it to where it needs to be. I would also say if you're struggling, Google AP Lang student samples, because especially for the past few years, they have them scored with the new rubric, and you can usually find like they have like, it's 2 documents. One is the essays and one is the scoring commentary. And the top essay is usually a 6 and it goes down. And so you can kind of see what it looks like. I've been doing that for my students. We've been looking at like 3s, like a 3 and a 4 in row B. And we've been looking at ones that got the sophistication point, just because I like them to see the stronger essays. And then we kind of talk about, okay, like what did they do well? What can you work on? How could you apply this? That kind of thing. So those are publicly available for most essay prompts. And so that would be where I would start too, especially if you're a visual learner and you kind of want to see like, okay, what do I need to do? Those can be really helpful. What are some common mistakes that students make on the exam and how can we avoid them? That is an excellent question. I would say, okay, like multiple choice, not pacing to finish, spending too long on one question. Because here's the thing, they're all worth essentially 1 point each, 45 questions. It's 45% of your composite. So I've seen students, well, okay, I've seen it in a mock setting. I have not administered the AP Lang test because I can't. I can do other AP tests, but you can't you can't like administer the test that you teach. So for mock situations where we've done like a practice test, I've seen some kids kind of like really mismanage their time. In general, if you have 60 minutes, I feel like maybe no more than 35 for reading and 25 for writing. But play to your strengths. Like if you know that you are super accurate with writing, then like maybe put those first, because that way you're like, okay, there were, I don't know, 20 questions and I probably got like 18 right. Well, there you go. You just like, you want to get, if you're shooting for a 3, you want to get at least 23 of 45 right. So think of it more like a game. I wish I understood this as a high school student, because even though I did pretty well on standardized tests, I was always that student who was like a straight A student. And then like my standardized test scores were like good, but like not as good as my grades. That would drive me nuts. And it was because like I did everything in order and I was taking too long on certain questions and I like overthought everything. And so if I could go back in time and be like, hey, it like, you know, I was an athlete, I did soccer, I did track and field, that kind of stuff, like volleyball. If I could be like, hey, you know how in a game we have to be strategic and we have to earn points, like this is what standardized testing is. Because I was like not really focusing on the strategy behind it. I was worried about just like, you know, like, did I get it right or not? So that would be a tip. And I would say the other thing is like, if you know the rubrics well, that can help you with your essay. That's why I think you should be looking at these student samples if your teacher's okay with it and you have time to, is because I feel like if you know what it takes to earn like a 130 or a 140 or whatever it is that you're going for, and you can kind of have like this mental checklist, that can help. Like the more I've talked to my students about the rubric and kind of shown them samples, I feel like the more comfortable they felt, because they're like, they wrote a timed essay the other day and I asked them how it went and they were like, it wasn't my best, but like, I at least think I got this score because I knew what to do. And I think that's totally fair. Like there are some prompts that I don't like. I mean, there's nothing wrong with them, like, but I just have certain prompts that I prefer. And so on exam day, we don't know what you're going to be asked. Like usually I think there's always one that like everybody hates. And so even if it's a terrible prompt and you hate it, you still have to know how to try to get that score. So knowing the rubric can be really helpful. Other things to avoid would be like just lower level language. Try to be very precise with your wording. Attempt all multiple choice questions in all essays. And that kind of thing. Like it's very odd to me, but like I know of times when students haven't written the essay and it's like, you could just write a thesis in one body paragraph and still gain some points. Like, so, you know, just really, I think those are like some big things. That's a good question. I'll think more about that because I feel like that would be a good thing of like, I did do a video on common mistakes for Q3, specifically for the overrated prompt a couple of years ago, but that is a good topic. I'm going to write that down. Common mistakes, because that way I can think about it more and get back to y'all. For synthesis, is there an acronym that can be used like SOAP? Are there frames? Okay, that's a good question. So I don't really know of I have an acronym for argument. I use CHORES, which stands for current events, history, outside knowledge, reading, experience, science. Other teachers use like ReHugo. I've heard of Gopher. There's another one that's super popular that I'm blanking on. But there's, and then there's the Space Cat and Soapstone for rhetorical analysis. I haven't really seen one for synthesis because like you're kind of just going off of the sources. Are there sentence frames? Yes. I would say I have some like sentence frames that I give students to kind of help them because there's certain things we want to avoid. Like that would be kind of going back to the common mistakes. We want to avoid like for rhetorical analysis. One choice the writer makes is there are way better options for topic sentences. So for synthesis, it's like one reason blah, blah, blah is kind of like a little cheesy. So there are some options for sentence frames and stuff as well, especially for like the thesis and like body paragraphs. For synthesis, it really helps if you know how to cite the evidence correctly instead of saying like according to source B. I wouldn't call that a mistake, but that is something that's kind of like just you could do better. I do have 2 videos that I published pretty recently about that and a blog post as well. So if you type in like Coach Hall writes how to cite for synthesis or how to cite sources or something like that, those should pop up. But that would be a quick fix for synthesis too, is if you're in the habit of saying like according to source B, you can actually use like the original text credentials. And that helps add some credibility to it, or just embed the quote and use the parenthetical citation at the end. We don't need to call it like source B in our actual essay. Okay, so should all 3 points be explored in a normal expository paper? Okay, so for your thesis, like, if you say you're gonna have like 3 main ideas in your thesis and then you only get to 2, usually what teachers tell students is just go cross the third one out. Like, so yes, if you make a claim in your thesis that has like multiple points, like a 2-prong or 3-prong thesis, then like yes, we want you to address those. But if you run out of time, we evaluate what's there. So, how do I avoid writer's block on exam day? That's a good question. I would say the first thing is like outline, and quick outlines. I have my students kind of jot down like not even their full thesis, but just like a paraphrase of it if they want to, and then like main ideas, and they'll just put like main idea and then whatever it is, like a word or two, and then like evidence. Also, any thoughts you have that are helpful as you're planning, don't assume you're going to remember them, write them down. I did this on like some of my grad school essays because like I would be like reading it and I'd be like, oh, I should write about this. And then like a couple times it happened, I was like, what was that thought? Like what, and so I would just write it down in the margin of like my scratch paper or whatever I had, because then I could be like, oh yeah, I wrote it down. And then I remembered what I was going to say. I know it's not totally writer's block, but it kind of is. I would say like, so a quick outline, like literally just like main idea, evidence, like for synthesis, I have my students will do like main idea and they'll put the sources they want to do or something, like whatever thoughts you have. Some of my students do more brainstorming, and it's more involved. It just kind of depends. So whatever, like an outline will help you with writer's block in the sense of like, you're less likely to get stuck halfway through. The students who just kind of start writing, then there's usually a point where they're like, I don't know what to say next. And then they have to stop and then it kind of wastes time. So that would be something. The other thing is like, you have to realize that you only have essentially 40 minutes per essay. So it is better to write something than nothing at all. So I don't really care if it is the cheesiest idea. Like for instance, my student that I was talking about earlier, who wanted to write about the movie Anaconda, and I know she was just trying to be funny, but like let's pretend that student is taking the exam. That is the only example they can come up with. Then by golly, you make a claim, you put in some evidence from that movie, you put in commentary and tell me why it matters and what we can learn from it. And like, I don't care if it's the cheesiest paragraph you've ever written in your life, you at least have evidence and commentary, and that is something. I think students are really hard on themselves on exam day. Like I am not looking for perfection, I'm looking for effort. So just take that pep talk as you need it. But like, I would so much rather you write something than nothing at all. Like make sure you have a thesis, make sure you have evidence and commentary in your paragraphs, and just do the best you can. Because like these are viewed as rough drafts. I think sometimes as teachers, we sometimes put too much pressure on students for timed essays and like our expectations. And like, it is a rough draft that you are writing under duress. Like, so I tell my students, like, I prefer you don't use the word uses. I just said the word use in the sentence. That is how hard it is to avoid that word sometimes. So as much as I'm like, please use rhetorically accurate verbs, if I see so-and-so uses this, then so be it, because you're writing under pressure. And that's why I do like a mock exam each year with my students. I do know the prompts in advance, but I try not to think about them too much because I want to know what it's like to be under that kind of pressure with them. I feel like I grade in a lot more forgiving way if I do that. So anyway, yeah, those are some tips for writer's block, but like just write something, even if you think it's terrible. I've also seen a lot of times our students cross stuff out, and a lot of times like they really didn't need to. They could have kept going with what they were doing. Cause like if you cross out a whole paragraph and then start over, a lot of times like your essay ends up being underdeveloped because you just run out of time that way. So like before you start crossing out entire paragraphs and stuff, because we don't read it if it's crossed out, just think if you could salvage it. What is chores for an argument? So chores is like a way to come up with evidence. So it stands for current events, history, outside knowledge, reading, experience, and science. Some people might have other meanings for it, but that's how I do it. And so like when my students are doing it in class, sometimes I'll write chores on the board and I'll give them some time to like come up with what comes to mind. I don't make them have an even number of entries per letter because quite frankly, like some students are better at history or current events and other students might have personal experience. And so it doesn't have to be even, but those are the different like categories of evidence, if you will. And then what we do is we kind of look at it and decide, okay, which ones of these could we write about best? How could we pair them together? What order should they appear in the essay? That kind of thing. So that's what chores is for. There's kind of like a longer process that I do in class, but then like when they do it on the exam, if they use that method, it can be compressed very quickly. What is the rhetorical situation in an argument essay? So rhetorical situation is typically used for rhetorical analysis. Now for an argument, like you are writing, so if you're asking like, who are you writing for? Just know that your AP readers are all going to be either a high school teacher or a college professor. Most of them are high school teachers from all over the US. Some of them are international, male, female, different ages, like we run the gamut. So like I am an AP reader, but I am not like indicative of all AP readers. So like you kind of got to keep that in mind. But like the one thing we all have in common is that we all teach either AP Lang or some kind of like rhetoric class, like some kind of like composition class. So that's what you know about your audience. But if you're asking about just like rhetorical situation in general, that applies to rhetorical analysis. The acronym I use is SPACE. So speaker, purpose, audience, context, exigence. The difference between context and exigence, the way I like to think of it is context is kind of like big picture. It's like a timeline. So it's like the historical context, what was happening before, during, or after the speech that's relevant. Usually the after is not relevant unless you're trying to do the broader context stuff. Things that were happening locally, globally, nationally, that kind of thing. The exigence is the immediate cause of the speech. So earlier I mentioned FDR's speech in response to Pearl Harbor. The context would be World War II was happening. America was isolationist, meaning like we were trying not to get involved. The exigence is the attack on Pearl Harbor itself. So context is big picture. Exigence is the immediate reason why they're speaking. It could be in response to an event. It could be because they received a letter. It could be because they're speaking at a convention. And then you want to ask yourself, okay, like what's the convention for? Things like that. So that's the difference between context and exigence. If you want a little bit more clarity on that, I do have a couple rhetorical situation videos. Like one is like, what is the rhetorical situation that I think could help as well. So yeah, definitely like feel free to check those out if you want like a little bit more clarity. I have like playlists on my YouTube channel that go into that. Let's see. Okay, looks like I'm caught up on YouTube questions. Let's see for TikTok. Okay, I think I'm caught up on TikTok questions as well. So I've been on for almost an hour. I will be back next week as well, same time. So 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, if you have questions. And then if you have questions, like also feel free to reach out on TikTok. Usually with TikTok, if you like post a comment to a recent video, I can do a video reply. So especially some of these questions that might benefit others, I can like make new content for that. And then also once I get to 10K, which is hopefully relatively soon, I can make the playlist as well, because I think that would be super helpful. My teacher showed your videos in class. Well, I appreciate that. Hopefully they were helpful. I try to make useful videos. I'm not like a professional video editor by any means, but I do the best I can. I have been told that, like, I think they were watching an old video, but I saw on Facebook a teacher commented that like I talk really quickly, and I was like, sorry. I actually like edit a lot of pauses out, so maybe that was why. But hopefully the videos are helpful. And yeah, if you're looking for specific stuff, if you just search for like Coach Hall writes and then like the topic, chances are I've made one. I will be producing new videos as the exam approaches as well. And I'll be offering tutoring. So if you go to my profile and my link tree, then you can like see that. And you can also reach out. Usually Instagram is one easy way to get a hold of me because other platforms have limitations if you have questions about that. It helped my timed writing. Well, that's good. Yeah, timed writing is like the hardest thing because you have so much pressure to like write a certain amount in a certain amount of time. How do I get better at multiple choice? My teacher says read, read, read. That's sort of true, but like not to contradict your teacher, but like multiple choice is really hard to get better at. I would say practice helps. A lot of my students have found that like since we're also studying for the ACT, because that's our state test, which is in, I think it's like the first week of March we're doing it. we've been doing a lot of like ACT prep where we'll like read a passage and I'll time them and they'll answer the questions. And then we talk about the answers and they like talk in small groups about it. And they have said that like one of the ways that helps is like them getting to talk to each other, or having me explain the question, because sometimes it's just a matter of like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. But they said like the exposure and like the timing helps. We do a lot of timed stuff in the spring semester just to get them used to it on exam day. And my students have really said that that helps. And that's something you can kind of do on your own. Like if you're self-studying, you can like find a prompt and time yourself, or find, there isn't a whole lot of AP stuff online for multiple choice, but you could use an SAT or an ACT test if you want to. I would say the other thing is like, if you have access to the correct answers, especially for like SAT and ACT, because AP Lang, sometimes AP Classroom, you don't always have access to the right answers and explanations. Always make use of the times that you do, and like actually go back and look at why it said the right answer was right. And if you don't have access to the answer explanations, at least do yourself a favor and be like, okay, well, I said the answer was A, but that was wrong. It was D. And then like talk yourself through, okay, why is it D? Because then I think the more you see correct answers and rationalize correct answers, the more it kind of helps you understand the questions. I took AP Lang last year and got a 4. Congrats. Yeah, 4 is a very, impressive score. I think, 4 in most universities, at least around here, a 4 will get you 3 to 6 college credits depending on the university. So 4 is a good score. For those who are taking the test this year, it depends on what you're shooting for, but like right now you want to be shooting for like at least a 23 out of 45 in multiple choice. And 4 out of 6 is on your essays. Now, obviously there might be a bad day and that's okay. That's kind of like the general target that I tell my students. Now, I have some that score much higher than that, but in general, that's kind of like if we're trying to get a 3 or we're trying to be comfortable at this point in the year, then that's what we want to go for. It's hard to focus on completing all the questions and getting them right. Yeah, that's the thing too, is like, I think with the reading multiple choice, I find the writing a lot more like pleasant. The reading, like usually the passages are boring. And that's where like, as a student, I'd be like, So I would say if you're really struggling with multiple choice, focus on the ones that are very concrete, like what is the purpose of this paragraph, or what is this word mean, and like read the surrounding sentences for those. Also, we talked about this earlier, but just remember that sometimes a hard passage sometimes has easy questions. So don't just like give up. Like if you're reading it and you're like, this makes no sense, start with, okay, what are they actually talking about? What is the topic? Also, sometimes they give you at the top, it'll say like, this passage is a speech from a women's activist in 1905. Read that, because sometimes it's really simplistic and I wish they would tell more info, but sometimes they actually give you good info that if you don't read it, the passage doesn't make as much sense. So always read that, including synthesis too. Like if they provide the info, it is a sentence, just read it. Yes, I hope y'all come back next week. So multiple choice has reading, which the reading part is like, what's the function of this paragraph? What does this word mean? And then there's like some questions about the specific passage itself. Sometimes there's questions about like tone, and then the writing ones are like editing. So not punctuation, but more like, should you add this sentence? How can you combine these sentences? Things like that. And I do have videos for multiple choice. Here's the downside though, is because of copyright, like I can't show questions and talk through them, but I can give tips on them. So I do have some videos that address that just in general. But if you're like wanting a walkthrough with certain questions, because of copyright, I don't want to like violate anybody's copyright. So that's why I don't show specific questions for those. So yeah. All right, awesome. Well, I have to shut down this live in another minute or two, so I'll take any final questions that people have. If you don't mind, if you're following on TikTok, if you wouldn't mind just tapping your screen a few times to give me some likes, that really helps as well for like future lives. But I will be back each week. So next Sunday, 3 p.m. Eastern, to answer more questions. And like I said, if you're not already following on TikTok, I'm trying really hard to get to 10K, not for selfish reasons, but just because that gives me the playlist feature. So if you have friends at school who are in AP Lang, and whether you're familiar with my videos or not, it would be great if you could tell them about these lives and things like that. All right. Bye, Victoria. So does the College Board release the previous years? No, it doesn't, unfortunately. They're really, really like tight about the multiple choice. So we can see the previous FRQs, but we cannot see previous multiple choice. Now, I think there's some from like years ago online, but they redid the test format a little bit a couple years ago. So some of these old tests are not helpful. But they keep the multiple choice like under lock and key for the most part. Like we don't get to see it as teachers. Yes, 1K gives me the ability to do playlists, and that would be super helpful because then I can literally like do all these common topics and be like, hey, here's some tips. And then y'all could cram better that way. Can intros be 3 sentences? Absolutely. Yeah, intros. I think intros should be short for a timed essay because you want to focus to get a higher score. You should really focus on your body paragraphs. Yeah, it's just the FRQs. But those are available to students. So if you want to study, they do have the FRQs and you can use those. Like I use them in my classroom. I use them with my tutoring students because I think it's helpful to see previous prompts. Like as a teacher, sometimes I make my own, but like there's always something about like, hey, this was on a previous exam. For what it's worth, I use stuff that's pretty current. So I try not to go back any further than, I think the oldest one I use is like 2011. But I use like the more current stuff in my class because the exam has changed recently and like different people were on the committee at different times to make the test and all that. So like there's certain ways that they used to phrase things that they don't phrase it now. And some of it's just like a quick fix. Like if you see them say rhetorical strategies, what they really mean is rhetorical choices based on the new wording. But like some of the older prompts are just like not the style they use anymore, which is a good thing. So I don't use those. So if you're looking to find like recent prompts, the more contemporary, the better, in my opinion, if you're self-studying. All right, awesome. So I will see you all next Sunday. Feel free to reach out on like TikTok, Instagram if you have questions, and I would be happy to help. So have a good weekend or a good rest of your day. Enjoy the Super Bowl if you're going to watch that, and I'll see you next week.